Hello, and thanks, Auntie Bev. I'm very well aware of whose country I'm standing in, and I'm very honoured to be asked to participate in the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. I have called freedom the most dangerous idea of all. It's revolutionary in its very essence. Virtually every armed struggle in this beleaguered planet is taking place under the banner of freedom. Freedom from tyranny, freedom from foreign domination, freedom from racial or religious persecution. Every fighter is a freedom fighter if you believe what is entered on the banner. Etymologically, freedom's a pretty empty concept. The word means withoutness. To be free of something is to be rid of it, is to be without it. Historically, a free man was one who was out of bonds. He was no longer a serf working for his landowner or an apprentice who was in indentures. Freedom was being without a master and therefore self-regulating, for better or worse. There has always been a persistent belief in developed societies that once upon a time there was a golden age when all men and women were equal and there was no ruling class, no landowners, no aristocracy. In Ovid's version, the golden age was first when man yet knew no rule but uncorrupted reason knew, and with a native bent did good pursue, unforced by punishment, unawed by fear. There's no reason whatever to believe that such a society ever existed on earth. But it is an idea and an ideal. It is more likely to come about as a result of the development of humankind over eons than to have been there as some prelapsarian state. Colonists encountering hunter-gatherer people for the first time thought that they had met people living as they did in the Golden Age. Nowadays, the word liberty is mostly used by a specific group of people. The American libertarians are now organizing the opposition to Barack Obama. An American libertarian like the late Aaron Russo would place the golden age of freedom before 1913, before the institution of the Federal Reserve Bank and the proliferation of taxation, before bankers took over the state. Russo died in 2007. If he hadn't, the current pillaging of the population to support the banks would have killed him. I don't know what he would think if he knew that the Federal Reserve Bank has got its $46 billion out of the crash of Lehman Brothers, whereas the mum and dad investors are getting nothing. Not even information as to how the liquidation of the company is proceeding. Such information is confidential. This is life in the free world. Now, we all know the famous words from the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For a certain very influential section of the American population, denial of the existence of God entails cancellation of these unalienable rights and must therefore be resisted in the name of freedom. In other words, the notion is deeply paradoxical. In America, libertarians, those Sydney libertarians here today, are probably wryly amused by the fact that in America, libertarians are arch-conservatives. They are, for example, defenders of the right to carry guns. In the words of one of their proselytizers, not so they can go duck hunting, but so they can defend themselves and their families against invasion. and so they can, if necessary, defend their liberty from the possibility of a tyrannical state. I hardly need to point out to you, I hope, how confused that is. A gun will not defend you from anything. It is not a Kevlar vest. And I wouldn't try shooting up the government if I were you anytime soon. According to the Progress and Freedom Foundation, the American freedoms are now threatened by UN Agenda 21 and its policy of sustainable development, described by Freedom 21 as a top-down control that stamps out private property, limited government, and free enterprise. These people have been around since the actual Agenda 21 has been around since 1992. To most of us, it is only painful in that it has not been implemented in any real sense at all. That these libertarians in America are being afraid of the wrong thing, but that's actually one of the best ways of limiting freedom. This is their description of what's happening. This horrendous mission is now pressing forward under the banners of Agenda 21 and its partners round the world. Only a solid, unshakable commitment to the truth will enable us to stand our ground. Only a clear understanding of the evil forces driving this agenda will enable us to resist the mental manipulation used to induce compliance. If we didn't know that our God has the future well under his control, we would have every reason to fear. As they do know this, we have every reason to fear. Many live in denial, refusing to face the painful facts that expose this covert revolution and the gradual loss of our freedoms, including the freedom to express our faith and share the gospel. So, it turns out that Agenda 21 is only part of a massive assault on the classic freedoms. There is also the assault on health freedom, which is the right to die without medical treatment, obviously. The threat of an international ID system through Real ID, and the scam called climate change. A couple of weeks ago, Freedom Plaza in Washington filled with protesters protesting against what they perceived to be the greatest threat to their liberties, the public option, the public health insurance option. The demonstration was planned by Freedom Works, a small government organization, one of an ever-increasing number of organizations that are coordinating the backlash against Obama. They are very active, they are very articulate, and they are very good at focusing their attacks on the weakest points of Obama's program. Senator Jim DeWint, Republican from South Carolina, told the white folks gathered in Freedom Plaza, "Friends, this is a critical battle for the heart and soul of America and for freedom itself. Freedom fighters are outnumbered in Congress, but not in America. If you continue to stand up and speak out, we will save freedom in America." Say it again, Jim. Freedom, freedom, freedom. Begins to sound like Richie Havens at Woodstock. Now, despite all that, despite the deep paradoxicality of the situation, freedom is entered on my banner too. For me, freedom is an absolute value upon which all other values depend. It doesn't have to be linked to usefulness or happiness or health or any other notion. If I say it's an absolute value, I mean that it must be respected at all costs. This isn't easy because freedom is the freedom to screw up as well as the freedom to succeed. Morality itself cannot exist without freedom. If an individual has no choice but to behave in a particular way, that individual is incapable of taking blame or credit for his or her actions. Having abdicated responsibility for what he does, the individual has become merely an instrument in the hands of others. Every time compulsion is used as a way of making people do the right thing, humanity is diminished. In case this seems far-fetched, let me take a really ordinary example, the case of wearing seatbelts. From any viewpoint, it makes sense to wear a seatbelt when you're in a moving vehicle. Not only are you less likely to be hurt yourself in the event of a collision, and not only are you less likely to be hurt badly in such a collision, you are also less likely to injure other people if your body is not loose inside the vehicle. A rather clever television ad during the campaign in England demonstrated a case where a boy had killed his mother because he was not restrained in the car, and when they had a relatively minor accident, his skull came into violent contact with hers. A no-brainer, you would think. That was a semi-deliberate thing. However, could the British wait until people had worked it out for themselves? No, they couldn't. Before it became cool to wear a seatbelt, before people who didn't wear seatbelts were understood to be idiots, they brought in a law that you had to wear your seatbelt or incur a substantial penalty. As there were never sufficient numbers of police to enforce the law, evasion of detection was easy. The law was relatively rarely applied, and the penalty was seldom paid. Wearing a seatbelt lost its appeal as a rational choice of intelligent people, and not wearing a seatbelt took on a spurious appeal as a resistance to oppression and the nanny state. What was more, there's another aspect to this which I find particularly galling. It's clear that the operators of trains and bus and coach lines were unwilling to invest in restraints for their passengers, and the authorities made no attempt whatever to compel them. Bus, train and coach accidents still register appalling levels of avoidable injury and mortality. And yet, on mass transport, you can't find a seatbelt to wear if you want to. Interestingly, airline operators adopted a different approach and began telling people that it was a mark of the seasoned traveller that you kept your belt done up all through the flight, like the pilot. And guess what? Everybody does it without the threat of a £50, $100, whatever, fine. Now, why is the idea of freedom dangerous? Why is it dangerous to say, do not compel? If you cannot persuade, keep negotiating. Well, you can see ways in which it might be dangerous, but just how dangerous you think it is depends on whether you think people are rational or irrational, good or bad. This is where bleeding heart liberals get into trouble. They will go on thinking that people are good rather than bad. A libertarian believes that if people can see what is right to do in the circumstances, they'll do it. The authoritarian thinks that A, they can't see what is the right thing to do, and B, even if they could, they wouldn't do it. The libertarian will spend time, energy, and patience trying to bring people round to her point of view, and maybe learn something about their point of view as well. The authoritarian will simply invoke punishment. Liberty survives generally because the entities that choose to limit it are confused, hypocritical, and inefficient. We managed to survive because of their inefficiency. In Britain, most people did decide that wearing a seatbelt made sense, and so they do it. The role of car manufacturers who installed various bullying devices designed to drive drivers off their heads if they didn't do it must also be taken into account. But I know one driver rather well who evades the strictures of Mr. and Mrs. Mercedes-Benz by doing up his seatbelt and sitting on it. If you invoke opposition, that's what you get. None of us likes to be ordered to do what we were going to do anyway. it takes the credit out of it. It takes the initiative out of it. It infantilizes us. Why is that we have that reaction to being ordered about? Do we instinctively desire freedom? Only Rousseau could possibly have believed that man is born free. Children are the least free of all human beings. They must live under the control and the authority of adults, whether they like it or not, whether the adults are any good at it or not. They must be monitored every waking and some every sleeping hour. They must go to school. They must learn what adults think they should learn. When I was a child, we were allowed to disappear for an hour or two before having to come back home and do our chores and go to bed. Now children don't even get to do that. Nowadays, the supervision of children is unbelievable. They may not even walk to school. They may not go anywhere without an attendant adult until they're how old? To reinforce these draconian controls, they've been given to believe that the world is full of people with evil designs on them, when in fact they're in the greatest danger at home. More children are sexually abused and killed by members of their own families than ever by strangers. Parents do as governments do. They invoke an outside threat to justify their own draconian control. For a child, acquiring even small liberties is a slow and laborious business. The supply of pocket money is made contingent on good, that is, submissive behavior. A single untoward event can result in docking of pocket money or cancellation of free time. Rebelliousness invites punishment, and that punishment, even in the 21st century, despite the Treaty of Rome and everything else, is likely to be physical. In Britain, parents jealously guard their right to slap their children, to beat their children up. It's ironic, isn't it, that if you buy a puppy in England, you'll be told that the puppy, when you're training your puppy, you mustn't shout at your puppy and you mustn't hit your puppy, that a confused puppy doesn't know what you want it to do and cannot learn. The English have learnt it about their puppies. They have failed to apply it to their children, who are shouted at all over the place and struck in public in front of other people. So man is not born free. Children everywhere are in chains. Children are owned like pets or slaves. They can be mutilated with impunity. No baby asked to be circumcised, or to be baptized for that matter, or to have genital reduction in girls, which is a popular operation in the United States, or any of the other things that go on to a child. Children may not run away. Real ID would chip children so you can track them all the time, like a criminal. They also want to chip old people. So you can see my interest in second childhood. A child has no rights, or indeed any say in the decisions of its owners, to divorce, for example. Children are not considered persons. They have to become persons by showing maturity. And yet children are more likely than adults to be treated unfairly, inhumanely, and illegally. You might have noticed the advertisement that was run in the travel section of the Australian this weekend, advertising Mauritius by a picture of a little girl looking very inviting on a beach. We can't show the pictures of our own children, they get pixelated out. Why should this little girl from Mauritius be suddenly beckoning people to Mauritius? What's going on there, Australian newspaper? They had pictures of children in every single part of that travel subsection of the Weekend Australian, this Weekend Australian. Have a look. If it annoys you as much as it annoyed me, do something about it. Children, of course, are not simply controlled. They're also manipulated and bamboozled. They are told lies, which they have to pretend to believe. They are not told truths that they need to know. that a relative has died, say, that another is in jail, or that the family is in financial difficulties. Denied real encounters, they are offered surrogates, toys, fantasies. We call this letting them be children. Before long, parents enlist the support of others to help in the suppression of their child, at the nursery, at school, in the health centre, at church. The unluckiest children will be told that they are born bad and must be redeemed by discipline. Adults will not relinquish their roles as controllers of children until the children have learnt how to control themselves. The process is resisted by some children more strenuously than others. It's the duty of the parents to instill in their children an understanding of the difference between right and wrong. That is, to make them accept their versions of what is right and what is wrong. Children who know that their parents drink and drive, for example, won't accept their parents' versions of right and wrong. Children can see hypocrisy. Generally, children are uncompromising in matters of right and wrong and will make their own decisions, and they will say shoplift until they encounter the severity of the law, which doesn't agree that shoplifting is a victimless crime and prosecutes it far more effectively than it prosecutes bullying or sexual abuse. Kids will make their own judgment of what that really means when it comes to accepting the conventional version of what is right and what is wrong. So when does the unfree child begin to long for freedom? The child learns to long for freedom long before the adults are willing to grant it. Parents speak of the terrible twos when the child has finally discovered the word no and never says anything else. But we don't recognize protest in children. How much of today's children's bad behavior is actually protest against the conditions in which they are being raised, against a culture that is deeply hostile to children and frightened of them. Now, in case that sounds like one of my madder and more exaggerated statements, just think about it. Parents used to have no choice but to neglect their children who ran wild most of the time that they were not in school. They have less time for their children now than they ever did because these days both parents are usually in full-time work. But they don't allow their children to run wild. Instead, they incarcerate them in the home. The child may succeed in having her room declared off-limits to her parents. It may become her own space. If it does, he and she will use their computers to seek adventure, risk-taking behavior, conscientiously risk-taking behavior. Children also come to resist their parents in every conceivable way until we finally arrive at adolescence. In order to justify the degree of adult interference in the lives of adolescents, a pathology of adolescence has been devised. Adolescents are by definition insane. And therefore we can do whatever we like to them. We can oppress them in any way we choose. The adolescent must earn the right to sexual activity by refraining from it until an arbitrary stage set by law. The adolescent may not drive a car, may not vote, may not purchase alcohol, may not marry, may not leave the parents' house, whatever. But adolescents reject the authority of their parents and prefer the authority of their peers. Leave me alone is the great adolescent cry. And that's the typical cry for freedom, for a freedom withheld. So what does it mean? What is the right to self-determination, which is another way of describing this ethical concept of freedom? The great proponent of children's rights, Richard Farson, has said, We will grant children rights for the same reason that we grant rights to adults, not because we are sure that children will then become better people, but more for ideological reasons, because we believe that expanding freedom as a way of life is worthwhile in itself. Which brings us back to the point I started from, of freedom as an absolute value that doesn't have to be justified by some perceived utility. Our Richard Farson has been bitterly reviled by those who point to angry, self-destructive teenagers and assert that the cause of their antisocial behavior is too much freedom when they were young, parents who weren't strict enough, who gave them too much choice, who let them run wild. Training a child should be like training a dog. Clear, unambiguous commands uttered in a business-like tone of voice, and then your child too can be as happy as Pavlov's dogs. A happy society is one in which children have been efficiently programmed to repress themselves and to believe what they are told. Such children will not use the internet to find out how to meet up with their peer group in some secret location on a deserted foreshore somewhere and indulge in extraordinary excesses that make their parents' fantasies completely horrifying. They will go obediently to war whenever we send them on whatever confused pretext. Theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do or die, or do and die, depending. They will give the best years of their lives and the best part of their days to an employer who will still owe them nothing in return, and they will enter into lifelong debt as slaves have always done. This is life in the so-called free world. When I said that for me freedom was an absolute value, I wasn't saying that freedom increases the quotient of human happiness. In fact, it's quite likely that it does the opposite. What I was saying is that freedom has a value above happiness. The word silly in English is derived from the word selig, meaning blissful. Blissfulness is associated with ignorance, with being unaware of what is going on, with a failure to register the painful anomalies of the human condition that Christopher spoke about so movingly last night. Happiness believes that we should all be seeking relaxation in this best of all possible worlds, and that we should ignore the portents of disaster and the unintended consequences of our own self-interest. Freedom says something else. Freedom says you owe it to yourself to live more fully than this. To be unaware is to be a pawn in someone else's game, and so to waste most of your human potential. Nowadays, we don't hear much about women's liberation. What has been generally accepted is that women should have equality with men, not something I have ever argued for. Equality is a profoundly conservative aim, and mostly encompassed by the merest lip service. So women join men on the treadmill. So what? The corporate world used to oppress men. It now oppresses both men and women. In a ruthless process of attrition, it jettisons both, all but a few, the most ruthless, the chief executive officers and their minions. They are still mostly men, but it hardly matters. Women had to be there. They had to see what the world of masculine privilege was like, just as they had to be on the front line in the army. And so they had to sit in parliaments and on judicial benches. But just being there was never the point. If men and women are to imitate each other's roles in a world unchanged, there has been no point. Historically, women have been owned and controlled by men, and therefore rendered incapable of moral action. They lived by and through others. their fathers, their husbands, their families. Submission and obedience were represented as virtue for females, when in fact they signify an absence of virtue. The word is connected with the idea of strength, a squandering of their will and understanding, a life less than human, less than fully adult. The consequences are most vividly demonstrated in the medieval muddle that is the law of rape. Equality holds these days that men as well as women can be raped, thinking simply by a name change to cancel centuries of treating women as chattels, as men have never been. The change went the wrong way round. The medieval concept of rape should have been struck down, not extended. The word etymologically is connected with stealing. Historically, rape is not an offence against the victim, but against the agencies that have an interest in her, once represented by the men of her family, now by the state. The raped woman herself, in any rape case, is merely an exhibit. Her perception of what happened is immaterial. It is the accused's perception that is material. Did he think that she consented? If he did, even if he was clearly mistaken, he is guiltless. The woman's word is not enough. If there is external evidence that she encouraged the rapist's attentions, interpreted as the way she dressed, the way she talked, where she was, whether she entered into any form of intimacy prior to being overwhelmed, if she did any of those things, she will be understood for the purposes of the trial, supposing she ever gets to trial, which is pretty rare, to have consented. You know, in the case of forcible buggery of a male, it will not be assumed that the victim consented or encouraged his assailant, nor will it be suspected that he is lying. Why would he tell such a lie? Although in some jurisdictions forcible buggery is now called male rape, the treatment of the victim still shows a contrast. The burden of proof required of a woman is massive, so massive that a conviction is possible only in the rarest of cases. Rape, that is the sexual penetration of a woman without her full consent, without her consent anyway, is a daily occurrence, both within and outside settled relationships. The woman who is not outraged by being made to have sex that she doesn't want has already sacrificed part of her personhood. She is letting herself be used. Even when she makes a complaint of rape, she will still be being used. The raped woman's helplessness is a direct consequence of her unfreedom. She is not allowed integrity. She is assumed to have put herself through an appalling series of humiliations at the hands of the police and the judiciary because she is infantile, attention-seeking, a fantasist. The law shields her, keeps her name secret, as if she is the one who would be shamed if the offence against her became known. She is, of course, doubly shamed if her allegation of rape is disbelieved. So if we're talking about freedom, then we have to understand that it means that we treat people as if they are self-realizing and independent, even when we know they're not. And that's one way in which it's a dangerous concept. But it is the only way forward if we are ever to be truly civilized society. Moreover, you have to understand something else. When women take full responsibility for their own actions, the outcome is not going to be peace. It's going to be conflict. Conflict is normal. It is the false peace that results from denial of conflict that is noxious, that destroys self-esteem. Women have allowed their sons to be slaughtered in idiotic and pointless wars because they surrendered their will and their conscience to others, putting them under no pressure whatever to justify or defend their cruel and mad decisions. Women got the vote in England be exact, propertied women got the vote in England because Emmeline Pankhurst agreed to support the war effort, to use her skills as a propagandist in the service of mass slaughter. It was an utterly dishonourable bargain which should never have been struck. While governments and international organisations have been pursuing their own equality agenda, women have been moving to another objective, toward freedom. Having entered into marriage and given it their best shot, they've been deciding that the sacrifice of their integrity and autonomy in the interests of coupledom has been a mistake. They have made their own analysis of the disappointments, betrayals, dishonesties, and evasions that have kept the marriage going, and they have decided to end it. They have thought about whether their children would be better off if they stayed in the marriage, and they've decided that even if they would, the price is too high. All over the developed world, women are opting for freedom rather than ignoble servitude. Politicians and churchmen rant and rail as the family falls to pieces, and still the women walk towards freedom. With that freedom comes poverty, comes hard work, both inside and outside the home, endless responsibility, blame, the dysfunctional single-parent family is your fault, and loneliness. The women's chances of remarriage are half their ex-husbands, and still they walk away from marriage itself. They have never not known that the life of a divorced woman is one of bitter struggle, that most of our lone parents are without support from the absent partner, and still they walk, because the struggle is a better life than resentful submission. The churchmen and politicians who lament the breakdown of the family don't see the obvious corollary of their own arguments. The patriarchal family of which they are such champions is built on the oppression of women, and as such it was bound sooner or later to fall. Other ways of rearing children will evolve, probably in a new context. Childbearing used to be a duty imposed on women whether they chose it or not. Most people now think of it as a right. In fact, it's well on the way to becoming a privilege, which will be withheld on all kinds of arbitrary grounds. And many of the people who have recourse to reproductive technology will have had that experience. Regularly, I get letters from people saying, "All this is your fault." You have destroyed the family. Those lemming women just saw your banner raised and trotted off after you to perdition. How do I explain to them that they do me too much credit? Far too much credit. I was a product of that same process. My book became, The Female Eunuch became a phenomenon because women made it one. It's not a particularly well-written book. It's not a particularly well-argued book. It's much too bookish for one thing. It's written in a style I call Australian Gothic. No, the women were already snuffing the air. They were already on the move. If they hadn't been, that book would have disappeared without trace. It would have mouldered on the shelves along with many other books of the same kind, written earlier, perhaps not so lucky in their timing. I will always be immensely grateful for it, even if it did give me a life that has been very odd and that is getting odder. I read things about myself in the paper every day that didn't happen. But I realise that I'm what is known as a living legend. And almost nothing you read about me will turn out to be true, even when it's signed off by the redoubtable Christine Wallace. But there you go. But it's time we really thought about this question of freedom. It's time we really realised what it is that we're fighting for. And it's time that we realised that if we don't agree to respect other people's autonomy, if we don't agree to negotiate for the things we want, for the future as we see it, then we cannot move forward at all, because we will simply retreat to the old repressive laws that say, do as I say, not as I do, and if you don't, I'll punish you. If you don't, I'll remove what few rights you have. Now, the question is nowhere trickier than when we come to deal with older people who will lose gradually, one by one, their freedoms. Do you realise that in most of the facilities where old people are cared for, they are locked in? What is their crime? What did they do? They might wander. Think about it. Think about it. Why did King Lear wander? Why every week do we read in local papers that yet another old person has vanished? And then we read a few days later that the body has been found somewhere out in the mulga, in a ditch, walking naked under the sky, looking for the freedom that took so long to acquire in the growing child and that was so swiftly lost in the aging person. We have to be able to do better than this. But what is happening is that we have now got digital technology, which means we can all be tracked. In England, there are 3,700 new crimes. In England, there are 20% of all the CCTV cameras in the world. There's one camera for every 14 people. Every single individual will be seen by a camera 300 times on an average day. This is where we're going. If you don't want to go there, do something now. Take action against the gradual erosion of liberties, even such liberties as the right to trial by jury and habeas corpus are under attack. We know why, because of the external threat. The worst thing about 9/11 was that it distorted the entire nature of our liberal democracies. And it will get worse unless we agree that the freedom from fear is a nonsensical idea in a culture where the media rack up fear every day. Fear of everything you could imagine. Fear of sunlight itself. Fear of uterine pregnancy. We could go on for hours about the things we're meant to be afraid of. Let's tell them we're not afraid. We don't do fear. Sorry. Thank you.